parking.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Call to order and a verbal roll call since we are being recorded.
Mark Saunders.
Randy Mason.
Jess Beringer.
Linda Kaufman, that constitutes quorum, so we are good to go. I sent out the minutes from the July 22nd meeting. Any comments, questions, corrections, additions? Motion to accept?
Motion to accept.
Second. Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Correspondence, I didn't,
We did get one letter.
did we get one?
Yes.
I have a copy of it.
Thanks, I forgot.
We all got it, that's how we know.
Yeah. We're gonna enter that into the record for, I'll get a copy of it too. Did you get that one, or did you send it to us? It's from Marcia Way and Patty Lieblich.
You sent it to us. And
Good eye? Yes,
Yeah, it's about 3 weeks ago.
yeah,
it was right after the last meeting.
right, and it has to do, I'm not gonna read at this point, but it has to do with our hearing that they weren't able to attend, which we're gonna be discussing, so
Right.
we can reference it. Okay, so we had the, getting public input on the minutes last time. And, I mean, on the permits last time, and I have it in the minutes with what people said. You wanna start a conversation on that, on what your thoughts were and how we wanna move and based on this letter and kind of let's wrap that thing all together?
Where do you want to start?
Wherever you want, knock yourself out.
I'll start and go around, that's good. We had them all over the board. There was no consensus. I mean, if you look at the number of people, they all had a different opinion. There were people that were for extending permits. There were people that were not for extending permits. In my neighborhood, there were people that were for permits being extended. There were people for not extending permits. I don't think any consensus was noted. But I would just add that when you add the possibility of another hotel on State Street, it suddenly goes to the side of, in our neighborhood at any rate, the side of making permits later, because we know that those individuals will end up parking in our neighborhood if there are not some sort of regulations to prevent them from doing so, or at least make them pay to do so. That's all I have to say.
I think the letter also indicated, though, that there is some misconception about the permits that are being given out, and so we just need to be sure that's clarified. They seem to be under the impression that they no longer get what is now 6 permits. So we just need to be sure and clarify that.
Yeah, that was one of the things that
Yeah, I highlighted the same
I was gonna
thing.
say, that I saw it in the letter, right,
Yeah.
is that we have never recommended reducing the amount of permits. Well, I shouldn't say it. What we have said is 2 permanent, our recommendation was 2 permanent, 2 transient, and 2 scooter. And that is a little bit of a change because people can get as many permanent stickers now as they have cars registered there. So there is that reduction, but that wasn't something that we've come out beyond that, so.
In reading this several times, I deduced that there's some confusion and that they are not able to attend meetings. And the one thing that leaped out at me was that why are we forced to own a scooter? We don't want scooter. It tells me that if one of us spoke to them and explained their points, maybe it would be an answer to their questions. And I would volunteer to do that.
I think that's a great idea if you would do that, because I was surprised by some of the comments too.
Yes.
Is I think because we added those 2 free scooter permits,
Yeah.
people are now thinking, well, and some of the comments I've heard back from people is, well, if I don't get my 2 scooter, can I get 4
Yeah.
permanent, whatever? But remember, prior to that, the only permit you had to buy, even if you were a resident and even if it was registered, was a scooter permit, which never made any sense to me, so.
Did anyone else get out of the letter that when they say they can't have friends stop by and see them because they're using the 2 temporaries? Well, what about the 2 permanent? Well, maybe they didn't send it back in and know about that process, that the 2 of them could have permanent and they would have 2 temporaries for their guests.
Yeah.
I'll talk to them.
The other thing that was interesting is they live on a street where there is no residences on one entire side of the street, so there's plenty of parking on the street. It's just a matter of having the permits to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there continues to be a lot of misunderstanding and misconception. So, I mean, if we can hit it one at a time, that would be great. I know I guess what I like to get out of this is sort of, you know, we're trying to move forward in our recommendations, and with our permits, the recommendations that we've made in the past, I mean, did anything in this meeting hearing change anybody's thoughts on the recommendations that we've had, which was the primary ones, the bigger ones, was changing the hours and limiting the amount of permanent?
Another point that struck me was the lady who spoke on behalf of hotels, and she stressed the hardship on employees and that we should be doing something to help them. Well, we have said that, and we suggested to the city and the chamber that people get together and create a program for them. And she said the park and ride is not working for her. We have a job to do ahead of us to address employee parking.
And I think the interesting thing on employee, and I agree, it's one of the pieces of the puzzle, but you know, that kind of goes back to, is it the city's challenge to fix the employee parking, or is it the employer's problem? And I kind of think it's a yes to both of them. It's got to be a collaborative effort to figure out the solution, but to simply not make a change in permits because of employees, to me is weighing in favor of the employees versus the residents. And so to me, it's sort of that three-legged stool, is the residents, the city, and the employer having to figure it out. And, you know, long-term parking and some signage and things like that go a long way.
But somebody has to start the ball rolling for an educational program or a program like, I bring back Allentown because we're both from Allentown.
Did we say that publicly?
There was that park and ride, or no, not
Park
park
and
and ride. There was a program that you got credit from every merchant you went into.
The park and shop program.
Park and shop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there could be something that's oriented toward employees like that.
Yeah, I mean, so am I hearing that a recommendation would be to continue down the path that we've had with the limiting of permits and going into the hours, but working on some sort of a solution, recommending to the city some sort of either, you know, that we come up with a solution between all of those groups, or that we somehow challenge, you know, chamber and all of us to get together to try and figure out how to solve the issue?
All we can do is advise the commissioners. So I would put it in terms of that we advise them to do something about employee parking.
And let's not forget what Carol told us last week, that she's seen hostility with the homeowners starting to fight back, if you will, or tell people, wait, you can't park in front of my house. And we don't want to have a hostile situation between tourists and homeowners. So it's better addressed while it's a minor problem and let it get a bigger problem.
All right.
But, you know, I do think we need more employer input. We haven't had enough as to what the issues are, because even when the woman was here discussing the hotels, it was not clear to me on why the difference of 5 o'clock or something a little bit later would make a difference, because it didn't seem there would be many employees arriving after 5 o'clock.
Right.
And so I just didn't understand how that made the difference.
I think you're onto something that's very important. Is I think the change scares people, because now we're saying, you know, originally, if you remember, we said to put them at the same as the meters, which would now be 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
And, you know, maybe our recommendation is 7 o'clock. We can talk about that. I don't know what it is. But I think the immediate reaction was, this is going to create a hardship for my employees. But the truth of it is, at least on our street and what I see, is the majority of employees start at 2.
Absolutely.
Or 3. So they're coming in at 1:30 or 2:30. Now, I suspect that there's a certain amount of them that take their chance, figuring that you know, from 2:30 to 5, what's the chance, you know, 2 tickets maybe over the course of a season? I don't know that. But I have seen cars park on our street that don't have permits, so I assume that they're taking a chance. But-
I swear the ticket guy seems to drive by on his bike every couple of hours, though.
That's a good thing, that's a good thing.
And it does depend on your location
Right.
in town.
Well, and keep in mind as the LPR license plate recognition takes off, increases, that's a much quicker, much more efficient system than, you know, the bike rider guy, so.
Since we're on that subject, it's important that we keep everything simple and that we follow the meter times. And we've believed that all along, and that's where I would stand on it.
I do too, but I'm with you. I think that somehow, and I'm open to suggestions, we need to get more input from employers, because I don't know why going from 5 to 10 makes any difference. If it was noon, then I could see, but you know, the majority of those employees are showing up anyway.
Well, and then there are also different employers with different needs, and we just haven't heard from enough of them, even though, I mean, the invitation went out. But if we could somehow get together with that, if you have some input, that'd be great.
Absolutely, come
Please.
on up.
The number of people who attended last meeting, and they were invited, shows you that the employers say they're too busy to come to a meeting.
Well, you know, summer meetings are probably not the best time to get merchants, and we understand that.
Carol Everhart, Rehoboth Dewey Chamber. What I might suggest is we have a downtown task force. Every single part, they represent retail, restaurant, the whole enchilada. And if you'd like this group to meet with them, I'd be more than happy to pull them together and let you talk to them directly
Excellent.
and hear the issues.
Good idea.
From our perspective right now, and I'm talking all the hats, not the visitor, the businesses and the residents, it's the long-term parking once again. Simplify it, identify it, keep it standard, because they are so confused. I'm getting no complaint over the price, 0. I've still not had one complaint. I'm not saying they're happy, but they're not coming to me and complaining. But they are complaining about it's too frustrating, they don't know how to use it. There's different time frames. They want to extend. That is clear as a bell. They want to be able to extend. So
Extend.
their time. So if I come into town and I want to I want to go, you know, walk the boardwalk a little bit, get a bite to eat, and maybe I want to shop a little bit, 3 hours doesn't do it.
No, but they could get a permit and stay there forever. That's
Well,
what we
they
need to
don't
tell
know.
them,
Or
right?
go to the outlying areas. So that's where the sign program has to work, because
Yes.
the idea of Rehoboth Avenue was to do
Right.
just that, limit the long-term parking.
Yes.
So we're
yes.
doing what we're supposed to do, by trying to get them off road, but they just don't know where to go instead.
Don't know where to
That's where
go.
we're lacking,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Well,
yes.
and this was one of the recommendations, and we need to, you know, revisit it, that we need much better communication in the terms of maps, color coding, signage, and the like, to direct people so they do know. Because there really does seem to be, you know, when we walk the dog early in the morning, there's lots of parking off of Rehoboth Avenue, but it's still this idea, they come in and they see the beach from the moment they drive in, and they just stop and park there. And that's what we are trying to limit, and we need to get them to understand there's some other areas.
Couldn't agree with you more. That is the problem. They don't know, and it's not easily visible to them where they can go.
Right.
Carol, does the chamber feel that 3 hours for having dinner is too short a period of time?
I get complaints, it's not long enough. It's just not
Yeah,
long enough.
I've actually heard some different complaints there too, with the 3 hour, is that
Wow.
maybe that should only be 3 hour limit up to, say, 5 o'clock. Something that we should talk about, because the dinner and a show idea, which of course that may change as the theater moves, people have complained that is not enough time in the evening. And the evening, the turnover is not so much the issue as during the day.
Or with good signage, there are places that you can stay longer than 3, it's just not Rehoboth Avenue. So I guess, you know, that was the challenge with implementing pieces of this and not the whole part is it makes the evaluation and the
Right.
usage very challenging, because it's only been pieces. So if we still contend, which I believe, is that Rehoboth Avenue should be that short term of 3 hours, and that's kind of the industry standard of it, then for those going to a restaurant, and you know, there's lots of restaurants on Baltimore, there's lots of restaurants on Wilmington, then we need to get them directed to those places that they can stay for 4 or 5 hours and not in front of the
And walk a
stores.
couple of blocks. They have to
And I think
have
two-
dessert and walk it off, you know?
But there you go. Well, two of the problems. One is often when they come in, have to wait. There's a line, so, we'll have seating in 45 minutes, we'll have seating in an hour. So there's one thing, right? Then they're seated for dinner, and then they really do like to walk around and shop after dinner. Most of the shopping is done in the evening, 8 to 4, they're at the beach.
I would hate to change that 3-hour time limit until we see how a sign program and a couple other things that hopefully are getting implemented this year work. Because I think we haven't given it a chance to work.
Well,
Sharon, I don't want to put you on the spot, but is the sign program going in?
Yes, it's, the funding for the signs just came through, and Evan's been managing that. I know that they'll be in place next season.
Okay. Which I think is critical. So, I mean, I don't think we've had it given a chance. I would have to agree. 3 hours probably isn't enough to do those kinds of things. But do we really want them on Rehoboth Avenue? Do we want to keep that at 3, get them to those side streets?
Can we add that 3 hours would be $12? For $15, they can stay all night. $15 is a daily permit, So it's unlimited. They could come early and stay late.
Here's the number one complaint. Number one is, it's not, I can't extend. Number two is, pretty neck and neck is, it's just too complicated for me.
I think I would love to take you up on organizing that downtown task force with us. So if you could do that and,
I will do that.
invite us, however that works, we would love to.
I'll get a date from you, what's good for you, and we'll make it work.
Absolutely. Because I think for us to finalize some of this stuff, that will help.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Carol. I mean, we've heard the same message from Carol consistently, which I think is important, is simplify, standardize, and communicate. And I think the partial implementation of some of this has made it a little bit of a challenge. But, like I said, I would be hesitant to go back to allowing feeding and changing to 3 hours without at least giving it another chance of good signage and good program and moving people around. I mean, I think that was a recommendation that we made that was implemented, and it's a matter of people getting, and I understand that doesn't help for those who are trying to do those things, but, if you go on to First Street or Second Street or, Wilmington or Baltimore, wherever the outlying areas are, then you can park for longer and you can feed.
with the signage that has actually already gone up, there are some signs that talk about 3-hour limit, and there's other signs that talk about 12-hour limit that are existing now. And, in the brochure, you do have it color-coded as to where the 3-hour spaces are and then the 12-hour spaces. But the signs that are up there that, and then this big has the 3 or the 12 in it, are the same colors. And I'm wondering if we can't color code those signs a little more appropriately. So you have the purple from the 3-hour from the brochure matching a purple sign, for instance, and then so people would see a little more readily. I just think that the way the signage works is going to be very important. It's not just a matter of the same sign everywhere. Color code the signs, I think, would probably be a good idea as well.
I think that's a good idea, something to look at,
And again, whatever input that we have for the signs, I think we should work with Evans on that. We've been, invited. It's just been difficult to attend multiple meetings. So I think a critical part of this whole thing is that communication.
Right.
And the communication extends to what I see as I'm driving down the street.
Another suggestion is we could do a little push, maybe in the spring, to the employers to buy permits for their employees. It's $250. Isn't a good employee worth $250? I would think so.
I think that's that's one of the questions out of the task force, I think, that we need to look at is that the complaint or the pushback that I heard at the meetings from the employers were, it's hard enough for me to get employees. Now you're making them buy a permit to park at night. Two things to counter that is they have to anyway because they start at 5. So I'm lost. That's, I think, a critical question to ask. And then the second is, how many of them buy X amount of permits for their employees?
And even getting an idea of how many employees are we talking about?
All right, let me get those number of employees, right? We just said 5 PM, why is that an issue?
Why is $250 an issue?
And how many buy permits?
And even then, they're transferable permits. If one employee quits, they can still give it to the next employee. It's not like they're having to rebuy them.
Since we're talking about permits, one other issue that we had discussed, and I think we should bring up again, is the idea of giving a parking permit to everyone who buys a business license for a fraction of the cost of the parking permit. That makes no sense to me.
I thought that did change, didn't that change?
No, it only changed, the cost of a business license for I think it was for massage therapy and something else changed. But it's still, most of the business licenses are in the $110 range, and they get a $250 parking pass with it. Now,
Hang on, just move the map off the microphone. There you go.
now that is going to change for realtors, because I understand the state just passed a new law that cities cannot charge a business license fee for each individual realtor. You know, I'm a realtor, and I think that's fine, because now they have to go out and spend $250 for the parking permit rather than getting one for their $110. So that there's a change there, but I don't know how many other people are getting this $250 pass for a small fraction of the price.
So that was one of our recommendations before.
Right.
I think it needs to stay as a
That's what I'm
recommendation.
saying, yeah, I think it needs to stay in there.
How about if I do this, two things before I lose track of this. Would one of you be willing, Evans, I'm gonna put you on the spot, but maybe meet with Evans to see what the sign concept and thing is as it relates to parking, any input that you could give to him?
Sure.
The other thing I'd mention is that right now, Merge is actually working on a final design option that they're gonna recommend to the commissioners. So they're actually gonna plan to present at September 9th at their workshop meeting, if anyone's able to attend. I think that would be great at that.
And which group is working on that?
This is Merge Wayfinding.
Okay.
So I would recommend if anybody can either make that meeting or meet ahead of time to see what it is, it would be helpful.
Yeah, so right now they've basically proposed 3 different design options, and then we had met with various committees to kind of get feedback on those design options. They're also putting together sort of a budget for how much the wayfinding would cost, and then an order of magnitude and location of where the signs where they're proposing to put those signs. So it's mostly gateway, pedestrian, vehicular. So they're going to present all that information to the commissioners September 9th.
Is parking part of that?
Yes.
And what time is that meeting?
I
Do you
believe
know?
it's 9 a.m.
Evan, is there any way that when this is finished, you could do a cut and paste with small images of all the different signs, shapes and colors, and present to us a copy of that so we see the tools that we're working with?
Yeah, I suppose so. I think part of the documents that Merge is preparing is the location of the signs, and then they've also sort of put together the design rendering that shows, right off of Route 1 what the signs would look like, and then coming into town all the way to the vehicular sign. So you kind of get a flow of what that signage would look like. And then I think in addition to the location map, we could get an idea of what signs are proposed where, what it would look like.
Would it be appropriate for one of us to talk with you prior to, or do you just want one of us to come to the September 9th meeting?
If you would like to talk with me prior, that'd be great too.
I'm looking, I have to see what September 9th is. You never know. I can't be there.
I'll attend.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And I mean, I think you have our
Yeah.
understanding, so that's great. Thank you. I'm gonna note that Randy will attend.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you.
All right, so let me get to the permits so that we can the recommendations that we had done. And kind of, all right, extend permit season to mirror the meters. I think we're still on that, right? I mean, they do now, but if, as we get into meters next, if we extend that, we would just keep them all the same?
But I am looking forward to hearing from the merchants as to why they think that's not a good idea.
The answer always has been to open the employee parking. That
Right.
has always been the reason
It-
they
well,
gave.
Exactly,
Right.
but
The only
since
reason
we
they
don't
gave.
understand
Right.
this timing of it,
If we offer them a better alternative.
right.
What I'd like to do is go through where we are with our feelings at this point, and then meet with
Right.
them and see if that
Exactly.
changes things.
Yeah.
So am I hearing that, yes, we would extend that season to mirror the meters?
Yes.
Yes.
Extend permit hours and times, basically,
Yes.
okay. Increased cost for additional permits and rentals, we already did that, that's done. The business license concept, which I think you addressed, is still on the table. I'm gonna hit some of the easier ones. Extend the free permits, that was done. Streamline permit costs. I still think we need to recommend to the city streamlining all of the different, like, there seems to be, that goes in with the business licenses and everything, it just seems to be so many different permit costs, trying to streamline it.
Right, so there isn't too much you can eliminate, transferable weekly.
Yeah, I think, too many variables, it was partially, according to this, make all extra permits the same fee as part of this, which I think was done.
Yeah, I know that there were some changes made, and like one of the changes was Deauville Beach became, you can use any one of the permits, so there's not one more permit.
Yeah,
out
you're
there.
right, that was the one, so I think that one's been done.
Right.
How are we feeling on increasing permit fees? The only one that I believe was increased was the daily, and Sharon, help me out, do you remember? I keep putting you on the spot, sorry. What was increased this year for permit
The
fees?
weekly, maybe
The
the
week-
weekly.
was
It's
it
now
just the
80
weekly?
It's $80 now. It was,
Yes.
was it?
And that's the only one?
Right. Suggestion though, maybe we don't increase the permits at the same time we're trying to get the businesses to buy them,
Okay.
you know?
So maybe,
2 different years, maybe.
okay, so look, I'm willing to agree at that, this point.
And it would be good for us to see how the year went. We have no idea. We could study statistics by the, next month.
Right, all right, so then the big issue, so I'm just going through the list before, because some of these were done. Use technology to issue permits and enforce permits, that's a program being implemented. Streamline permit costs with some being done and the rest of it being part of the whole, the licensing thing. Extend free permits to scooters, we did that. So the real one now becomes the limiting, back to the 222 concept.
There seems to be more misunderstanding there than real objection. Once they understand it, I don't think they object, but as Jess said, the woman that wrote us the letter, I don't think understood it, that they, that you don't lose your other two because you get 2 scooters.
Right.
So,
I think that we really need some more information. It was brought up that we really don't know how many households get more than 2 permanent ones. And if we could get some statistics from the parking office to see, is that an issue? I mean, if there are 10 houses in the entire city that get 3 or 4 permits, then it's not really an issue. But if there are a lot of people, maybe we shouldn't be encouraging so many permanent ones. On the other hand, it was also brought up that many of the people who might have, let's just say you have 5 cars, they don't necessarily bring them all the same weekend that they come. It's just a matter of which car they bring. And so I think we need to investigate that a little bit more.
Is that something we can get, Sharon?
Yes, I'll speak to Gene, who's responsible for that, and we can probably get some numbers on that.
Okay, I think that's a good point that we had talked about before. Before we go further on that, is let's see how many, if there's, to your point, if there's 10, I'd like to see, I don't know if this is that detailed of a breakdown, and Sharon, if you want me to send it via email, I will, but I'd like to see how many get 2, how many get 3, how many
Oh,
get 4,
exactly.
how many get
Yeah.
5, how many get 6,
Right.
so that we
Yeah.
can begin to assess
But,
that
you know,
issue.
couldn't we almost talk about later on perhaps a maximum? Because realistically, you have 2 spaces in front of your house. If you're parking anywhere else, you're in front of someone else's house, and I don't think that's fair. You know, so I mean, to have 5 means there's 2 cars in front of your house, there's 3 in front of my house, you know?
If they
So-
bring them all at the same
If they bring
time.
them all at the same time.
Right.
So, you know, maybe use the transferables if they have more than 1 car. Or maybe give them
Well,
4 transferables
well,
instead of
exactly.
2 and 2 or something.
But I know,
Yeah.
one of the points that was made, was actually made by the mayor. He has, I believe he
5
said,
cars, he
I
said.
think he said 3. But he also has plenty of off-street parking for all of his cars. He doesn't park on the street at all. And I think there are other houses like that. When you have more cars, you may have more parking spaces. So I just don't know how big of an issue that really is to have to try and limit that.
All right, well then, let's do this. Let's get that information from the city. Hopefully we'll have it before the next meeting, and then we can finalize that
Right.
last piece.
Okay, great.
All right, so hitting the permits, I believe that was all of the items. And to kind of wrap up what we got out of the public input that we did last time was that there wasn't a whole lot of consensus, but I think there's a lot more misinformation. I know the one gentleman that
Yes.
spoke was adamantly opposed to some of the things that we talked about until we explained it better. So,
Right,
you know,
exactly right.
that's a matter of, hopefully, and I'm gonna ask the mayor that this time when we make the recommendations, if we could have more time to make the recommendations and answer questions. Because the last time, I thought it was gonna be a question and answer afterwards, but it was simply the presentation and then that was over. And then that's when all the misinformation got out. So I'd like to see us kind of get more of a Q&A kind of thing through the commissioners. And I'd recommend sometime in October as a possibility, because the new commissioners will be seated. You know, I think making anything at this point with 2 commissioners leaving isn't reasonable.
The meeting, we had our last meeting, there were 6 speakers. 4 of those had subjects that we weren't there to discuss, you know,
Yeah.
bike racks and hotels and so forth, jazz festival, you know, so we had a number of people, which is fine, but they weren't there to talk about extending permits, which tells me there isn't that much interest one way or the other in extending or not extending.
So I'm gonna throw something out on permits and just to get the committee's input. So we've talked about, you know, extending times, whatever. Is it something that over the next year we should begin to investigate the whole program change of residential's only, you know, time limits for non-residents? Or should we kind of implement some of these things, get the input from the business community before we start talking about alternate side parking and, you know, all the different things that have been sort of chatted about?
Well, there's so much going on right now with a possible garage, with a possible 2nd floor on Rehoboth Avenue, and there'll be parking issues there. There's so much more that's going to happen the next year. We're better off waiting to see what actually transpires and what doesn't. The comprehensive plan is addressing parking issues.
I agree. I think
There's
that's
so much
great.
happening.
I just wanted to make sure that, you know, we were still on the same page, that we're gonna kind of push forward with these and not do any dramatic recommendations
Not
at this
yet.
point.
But residential parking should be an issue for a year from now.
Yeah, well, fine.
It'll always be an issue.
It's in the comprehensive
It'll
plan.
always be an issue, yes.
Forever and ever. Okay, so that I think is permits. Does anybody have any, before we move on to any other topics, anybody in the audience have any questions, comments, questions about permits?
I especially like the idea of the color coding or images, so people, it sticks in your mind.
Yeah.
Words, sometimes they read, sometimes they don't. I especially like that.
Okay, so what do we want to tackle next? We've got some of the easier things. I think we've gone through this list. I think we've talked about continuing pushing the city to close the loopholes in some of the kind of free spaces that are out on the street. That would be, continue to be our recommendation.
Yeah,
I think,
and if we could maybe get a report back from the parking department, you know, what is the plan there for that? You know, because I think we even gave them a list of some specific ones.
I believe we did, but I think what I will do is follow up with our list. Just let me make a note of specifics and just make sure I get it in writing to the city. Okay, just make sure I get my note. All right, that's an action item for me, I'll do that. All right, so we want to start on meters? Are everybody comfortable, I think, with where we are in permits? I think we have a lot of definitive things. I think there's a couple things that we will wait to do until we have the meeting with the chamber. All right, so let me go over what meters. I'm just gonna read them all before we can comment, but we had extend the meter season from May 1st to September 30th. It was not done, it was put in place from Memorial Day until it extended, I think, a week or 2 weeks or whatever, but not the time that we wanted. Enforced meter feeding, vary allowable length of stay, that was done. Change meter enforcement time to 10 to 10, that was done. Increase meter cost in core area to $3 an hour, that was done. So, those are the meters. So, I think the things, go ahead.
I know there was another issue, I'm not sure where it is on here, and that was the 30-minute meter.
Yeah.
And that remains, I think, a big issue. You know, we talked about trying to have, you know, evaluate where they are, why they're there, do they need to still be there, and what is the procedure for requesting one or moving one. And then there was the final thing about whether or not they should be 24 hours and 365 days a year. I don't know if there's really active enforcement, but most of these 30-minute meters, they run through the entire year. And I don't think that there's necessarily a need. In many cases, the establishments are closed. And in the evening, in some locations, the presumed business that has the 30-minute meter out front are closed, you know, even in season. So I think we really need to take a strong look at that.
Randy, isn't it true that all the meters are 30 minutes? I mean, you can put 30 minutes in, right?
No, 30-minute limit.
Right, 30-minute limit. I know what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I mean, what if we did away with them completely? Just put regular meters and just put 30 minutes in. You know what I'm saying? Why do we need separate meters for 30 minutes?
Because they're trying to get extra turnover.
They're-
You're only
People
allowed
that
to
are
park
there.
there. Yeah, instead of our 3-hour limit, these
Our
have
30-minute
a 30-minute
They're
limit.
supposed to be short-term. I mean,
Right. but
historically,
I'm just thinking myself that any meter can be short-term. Just put 2 quarters in instead of 4
No,
quarters.
people need to know that they're not gonna be able to park there.
Remember we
for more
talked
than
about
30
color
minutes
coding?
Because
All right,
they're
so you wanna
running
reserve them
into
for-
whatever it is they, you know, the establishment is. Picking up food, or I don't even know what some of the others are for, frankly.
I mean, theoretically, you do it for, you know, anything that takes
Any-
short-term,
yeah,
picking up
anything
food.
short-term, right.
If there was a drugstore picking up a prescription, and
Or roundabout's a good example, people running in for a newspaper.
Right,
But if there were plenty of meters, it wouldn't be an issue. We're reserving them because everything else is full.
right, exactly.
all right, so this is where we were last from the city. Evaluate the criteria for process of placing and removing 30-minute meters. The criterion process has not been developed, so I think that's still one of those that needs to be done. Okay. Does everybody agree with that? Evaluation of 30-minute meters removal. City manager and technical service have reviewed 30-minute spaces at the city and ultimately identified a possible 13 spaces that could be eliminated. They've not yet pursued eliminating these spots for the year and instead asked staff to monitor the use over the summer and reevaluate it. And Additionally, new signage for the 3-hour and 12-hour parking might change availability and demand of 30-minute spaces. There's been some discussion about allowing 30-minute spaces to become 3-hour spaces after 5, however, it was not pursued. So there's ongoing things, I think, that are being looked at the end of the summer, or after the summer. So I would assume that the goal of evaluation of 30-minute meters and remove addition as needed is still there. Correct?
Correct.
For our recommendations. Better mark the 30-minute spaces so people know before they pull in. Staff's evaluating a better way to do it. You know, we had talked about painting spaces or something.
Correct.
You know, something on the thing so that before I pull in and then see the sign up and then
Halfway in and then back out and
Right.
tie up traffic, right?
And by painting, it would be the ground space.
Yeah, even if it's,
You see it before you get there.
you know, even if
Yeah.
it becomes.
It works in Europe beautifully.
Some color code that's
Okay.
right in the front of a stripe or something that says to me, you know, this is a.
Big and bold.
So I think those are the 3 things under 30 minutes since you brought up, so we'll do that first. Criteria, so yes, we still need it. Evaluate the current location, remove it, yes, it needs to be continued. Remove some after 5 PM, yes, that needs to be evaluated.
And then the signage.
And then the signage, right? All right. So that would be those. Then let's go to the regular meters. So the 2 biggies. Let's talk first about the season. What's everybody feeling? Right now, the season goes from, I'm still confused, Memorial Day.
The problem is it doesn't just say May 1 to something
Right.
else. It's the second Saturday after,
Right.
and
Right,
After
the
Dorothy
third
clicks her
Thursday.
heels and spins 3 times.
it's just too complicated.
So to make it easy, why don't we just stick with what we said last year? May 1st.
What is it
September
right now? It's
30th.
the,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Friday before Memorial Day and the second Sunday after.
Second Sunday, there we go.
wait,
Except on leap year.
Friday before.
But we had said September 30th.
Right.
Friday before
We had said-
Memorial Day to the second Saturday, Friday, Thursday, second Sunday after, whew,
That's confusing.
Yeah, it's very confusing.
okay. So originally we had said May 1st to September 30th.
Correct.
I think that would be one of the great conversations to have with the downtown task force. Because I still contend that the season needs to be extended for a lot of different reasons. I mean,
Yes.
it's a revenue issue for the city, it's a turnover issue, it's the fact that we're busy, you know, maybe not as much in May as in September, but certainly in September and even into a couple weekends of October, it's busy.
And I think even the commissioners, if you remember, we had some support from some commissioners. It was what I would call a close call. We didn't lose by a big amount.
And we did discuss with the increase in technology with the meters, the ability to use meters for Sea Witch or something in February if it were a major draw, the swim, things like that. I mean, the town gets packed. And that's a possibility down the road.
And also discussion about whether or not we should consider running it just weekends much later into the fall. Because we still fill up every weekend.
That's an idea, yeah.
And the businesses pointed out to us, Trey pointed out to us when he was here, that that's a problem for them. They lose money on weekends because their own regular clients can't get in.
So I think the consensus from this group continues to be, yes, we should extend it. How long and how many weekends and things like that, I think
Question.
getting the input from the chamber and the business group would be a great piece before we make the final. So I think we can say, yes, we still believe that we need to extend it, but we just don't know at this point.
This is a touchy subject, but I'm going to say it. We've all been given as residents a major job to pay off $52 million. And everywhere we turn around, whether it's water or sewer or assessment or trash, has gone up 30 to 70%. There are a lot of people in eastern Sussex County who are waiting for the season to end to pour in here free. And this might not have been a good idea last year, but this year, I think they have to share in helping pay for the infrastructure. Period.
I agree.
You know, meter fees are user fees. I mean, obviously, they create turnover, they do a whole lot of things, but it's a major revenue source for the city, so I'm not disagreeing with you.
And I'm saying, thinking that that is just sort of the icing, because I think we need it for the turnover and the like, and the fact that we managed to get additional income is just good. But, you know, the income isn't necessarily the impetus for this.
It's not the impetus, but I think, Jess, you bring up a really good point. At this point, when the full-time residents, or any residents, you know, homeowners, whatever, are being asked to pony up,
Carry a big burden.
carry a much bigger burden than in the past. Where else do we derive revenues? Well, parking is one of the big things. So that goes to the permits and the extending them longer. Is, you know, do employees have to start helping with that infrastructure? Do the Sussex County people, you know, every development that's going up says minutes to the beach, walk to the beach, ride to the beach, short drive down Route 1, to the beach.
I think we're going to be surprised in September at every day, daily, not just weekends, how
And
packed
I
it's
hear
going to
from
be.
a lot of my friends is, you know, I'm not paying those meter fees, but as soon as I go in, I'm coming in. Well, you know, there has to be a two-way street
Where are
here.
you gonna go until then, you know?
So, and I think that that's the conversation with the business community too, because, you know, there's always this big thing is that, you know, in the parking industry, somehow paying for parking is like the biggest taboo, and yet, you know, it needs to be looked at. So I think things have changed since we sat here last year, and I think that's one of the things worth looking at. And you know, the commissioners are gonna have to make some difficult decisions when it comes to increasing meters or times or permits or whatever. But I'm hoping that, to your point, they can look at the bigger picture, because they've made those tough decisions to increase our taxes. They've made those tough decisions to increase the water and sewer. They've made those tough decisions to increase the trash. And, you know, to your point, is it time to make the decision to increase other things?
It is a time to think about all year meters. Why do we even have a
Whoa,
season?
whoa,
Why do we even have a
I didn't
season?
say that. That
You know?
That's coming, but down the road.
I mean, we're busy all year. Makes sense.
Well, this is why I was suggesting at least weekend, you know,
Yeah.
much further into the year.
I think extending the season is something that definitely has to get on the table and discussed. I think the beginning of it is us agreeing that it needs to get extended. I think going to the chamber with that and having that information and discussion. And then I think when it gets presented to the commissioners, it has to be presented with not just the turnover, but, you know, the whole picture.
Sharon, last year when we wanted to extend the season, I remember that you agreed, and you were a lone ranger in the audience, so that it's more and more people are becoming aware of that. So thank you.
You know, we're not a Memorial Day to Labor Day town, and
No,
we should
Exactly.
No,
Exactly.
we should
Exactly.
acknowledge that, and acknowledge that short of beach tags as a user fee, or as I sort of tongue-in-cheek said, putting up 3 toll booths because you only have 3 entrances, you know, we need to pay for our infrastructure, and people come because the streets are clean and it's safe and secure and the nice beaches are clean and all of that, but everybody has to contribute. Not just all of us,
Absolutely
this
right.
one sitting at
Absolutely
the.
right.
Okay, so let me kind of recap where we are. I think we know where we're going with permits. I will put in the minutes the recommendations, the things that we're still looking at, and the things that still need to be resolved. I think we've tackled 30-minute, and now we've really talked about the 2 major issues of meters. I would suggest that our next meeting is after, as I said, we meet with the task force, the downtown task force, so that we get input, because we can get input from them on the meters and on the permits. And then what I'd like to see at our next meeting is kind of wrap this stuff up with a final set of recommendations.
You're suggesting meeting with them, not at a meeting, but separately?
Well, I think they meet separately.
We can do whatever you'd like. If
Well-
you'd like me to bring them here, I can do that. If you'd like to meet someplace else, we can do that.
I'm just wondering what's appropriate in terms of having to have the public forum.
It might be more comfortable to meet in another place. I could do something like the Belmore, has a nice big meeting room, we could do
is it a public meeting though?
We haven't turned anyone away.
I mean, advertise or whatever, because we're required to meet.
I do not have to do that. I can simply have a downtown advisory task force meeting and invite you to it.
Great.
Yeah,
How many people
okay,
do you
I mean,
usually
that-
get?
I'm fine with that.
As long as we can do that, I
I
think that's
think
great.
we
Yeah.
can go as a body, because we're just gathering information. The
Yeah.
decisions that we make are here.
Right.
I don't think,
Right.
we will not make a decision. We are listening at that point.
Sure.
We are bringing that information back to this
We are
group.
their guests.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, great, perfect.
Okay,
We can pick a date if you know a date.
I'll get with you after the meeting.
Okay,
But we can, I don't want to discuss,
okay.
you know, on tape all our different challenges that I have on golf matches.
We can do that.
For the audience out there that wants to
Yeah.
know when I'm golfing. Because, you know, we get so many people tuned in. Okay. Having said that, why don't we, is there anything else that we want to talk about at this point?
Just citizens, I think maybe.
Yeah, I'll get to that, but on ours?
No?
One observation, it has to do with other committees, but it relates to us too. As a resident of Oak Avenue, this is a positive for the city. I can safely say that I've seen 100% increase in people biking to the beach over last year. It is amazing on a weekend, and families of 6 and 7 and little ones. This is good, and the city has to continue to provide more bike racks, because for every family that goes by bike, it's one less car, one less SUV looking for a space. And that's how that relates to us, but it is amazing. This is a beach town, and it makes you smile when you see that. And it can get better. And the bike shops are selling little attachments that you can put a boogie board on. You can do an umbrella. I mean, they're taking everything to the beach on bikes. That's positive.
The more alternate forms, whether it's biking, whether it's the scooters,
Scooters.
whether it's the
Yeah.
park and ride, whether it's Uber, whether it's
Walk,
whatever.
and walking is increased. I mean, yes, it's
We just
good.
have to make more areas walkable and
So
rideable and,
we can't let that stop.
right. I
Yeah.
agree. I have one other thing I want to, under current parking issues that I was going to bring up, but I just want to update the committee on the parking deck task force. But before we do that, is there anything else? You missed the last meeting because you were off and,
No, I was here. I missed the last garage meeting.
that's what I meant, the task force.
Oh, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Because you were frolicking and.
I was, Portugal.
So over the last two meetings, the 2 meetings ago, it was discussed that there is some infrastructure issues in the parking lot over there that have to do with the water lines, storm sewer line, whatever, and some fiber optic cables with the 911. And so there was some concern that it would be a deal stopper. The city met with the architect and engineer for the lot and the city hall and the colonial parking that is proposed it, and discussed all the issues, and apparently it's not quite as dramatic of an issue as it was at least first described. It's not that it's not. There are some issues, but anytime you dig, you've got those things to be concerned with. So brought it back to the task force, and in my opinion, it went from sort of, this is a 10+ impossible mission to, it's doable, it just has to be figured out how to work it through. So what the task force has decided is that we would go back to the commissioners again, even though we did it, put an extra step in, because there's been so much talk about this infrastructure, potentially saying no to a possible deck, that before we go out for whether it's an RFQ or an RFI or an RFP, request for information, or request for qualification, or request for proposal, that we make sure the commissioners are still on board. Because the worst thing the city could do is put all that time and effort, make somebody respond to something with time and effort, and then just say, oops, just kidding, because we didn't have the commissioners. So that's in the process now of being sure that the commissioners are still on board to investigate this. And then I think what's going to come out of it is probably an RFI or an RFQ, which is a little less consuming than an RFP, but just to make sure that we have all the information and potential costs and things like that to the city before any recommendation goes forward. So that's where we are at this point. And that's in the process, so, you know, it's one step at a time.
Yep.
Okay, we can set our next meeting date, and then I'll have citizen comment. It's gonna have to be after that, and that's gonna have to be in September at some point, so I would, Carol, how soon do you pull something like that together?
I would try to do it quickly, so if we could do it before I would say absolutely before the 20th of September.
Okay, we can work that out then, so let's look at,
Never the end of September.
23rd is,
nah, 23rd's not good.
okay,
23rd, 24th, 25th are not good for me.
okay.
How about the end of that week, Friday?
Ooh, well, we're into September at that point, right? What's Friday look like to you guys, the 27th? Nope, okay.
Actually, that could be okay, I'm just not sure
How
yet.
about Thursday, the 26th? I know those,
That would probably be better for me. What about the week before, though, the 16th?
well, we might not even be able to meet with them until,
Oh, okay, we're talking about our meeting, yeah.
If you go the other way, we're in October almost.
yeah. And what's the 26th or 27th look like for the room?
I'm about to check.
I knew you were doing that.
It's not letting me in. I'll have to check my calendar downstairs. 26th, when is that?
Thursday, the 26th.
I don't think anything's scheduled at this point.
Should we try Thursday, 26th? What works best?
Well, Wednesdays are generally not good for me. Wednesday that week might be better. I could just skip our sales meeting. Is that a possibility?
If you
Well,
can't
I've
do
got a
Wednesday-
parking deck task force that morning, but I can do after that.
I'm not here that day at all.
Oh, okay, I hear that. Well, let's go with the 26th.
26th?
Yeah.
9, 10, what works best?
I like
open.
9.
I don't care.
9?
9's fine.
I'm
Good.
fine.
September 26th.
9 a.m.
Oops, let me get this in. September 26th, 9 a.m. added, we're in.
Oh, you have it open. When is the next scratch meeting? You said it's on the 25th?
Yeah,
You know what time? You have it right there.
25th at 9 o'clock.
Thank you.
Okay. Any comments from the public? Oh, that's easy.
You were talking about bicycles and stuff like that?
You need to come up to the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, thank you. And identify yourself.
Patty Brown at One State Road, Rehoboth. You were talking about the bicycles and stuff. The bicycles, they have to have bells on their bikes. You're gonna have to start making that a law or something. Because when you're walking and they're biking behind you, you don't know it. They don't let you know it, you know, it might help.
All right, we will pass that along to
Yeah, to
the
I
Streets and
I
Transportation.
think that is currently indeed the law.
Is it?
I believe so.
I-
But,
but-
I
but,
had went to the bicycle.
but- but-
place,
but-
and I
but-
told them, they have the bells
I need you
themselves,
up at the
I mean,
microphone.
especially when you have the students come in. They don't have, you're giving them bicycles, but there's no bells on the bikes.
All right,
that's a good.
we'll look into that one.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. All right, anybody else? Oh, with that, 10 o'clock, meeting is adjourned.